So the Detroit Pistons traded Marvin Bagley and Isaiah Livers plus 2 future second round picks to the Washington Wizards for Danilo Gallinari and Mike Muscala. Do you know what the first thing I thought of when I saw this deal was, Bryce?
What?
I texted it to you. Like the funniest
Oh, yeah.
is by
I didn't know that when
that,
it happened. I found out after it happened.
Yeah, the funniest piece of this by far is that, and look, like I don't think there's like anything in this. I just think it's funny given all of the hoopla around Arn Tellem and the Tellem family and everything, is that Danilo Gallinari is represented by Michael Tellem, who is at Excel and is Arn Tellem's son. Just a funny, probably like there's something there, but regardless, it's funny to note. We'll talk about something that I think could be critical there long term. So my initial reaction to this was almost to be annoyed, because if I was a Pistons fan, like I'd be frustrated by this, right? And you can tell me how you feel in a minute here, Bryce. Just because, look, they gave up multiple picks and Trey Lyles to get Marvin Bagley, and now they're basically giving up 2 second round picks to get off of the Marvin Bagley contract this for this offseason, right? Because what Marvin Bagley's trade does for 2 expiring deals, it creates potential for more cap space, because both Gallinari and Muscala are on expiring deals. Basically will create 12.5 million extra in cap space this summer, because that's what Marvin Bagley's deal is, right around that mark. For this coming off season. And then I stopped and I thought about something I always talk about on this podcast, which is you can't get locked into a sunk cost, right? The Marvin Bagley original deal is a sunk cost. If you're thinking about this from the perspective of building a team, the worst thing you can do is just get locked into your guys and not think twice and just continue to move forward with that. Honestly, being able to get off of that Marvin Bagley deal for the cost of only 2 second round picks, and frankly, taking the Isaiah Livers club out of the bag, quote unquote, for Monty Williams, because he continues to play Isaiah Livers, and Isaiah Livers brings very unsuccessful minutes to an NBA court. I think this is a smart deal for the Pistons. Like, look, we can't remove it from the context of everything else. And I think the context is really important when discussing another point I want to bring up after I get your take on this. But in a vacuum, this deal is smart, I think, for the Pistons, and makes sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a vacuum, the hard part is we know that outside of the vacuum, I think to go to something you talk about is the process around this whole experience with Marvin Bagley was just bad. You traded away assets to bring him in. Okay, that was okay. I can't say that I was super upset about that. Although, like, you see what Trey Lyles does as a rotation player on a top 5 team in the West right now, and you're like, hey, a team like the Pistons who could use a guy that just is a good quality rotation player and spaces the floor, but at the end of the day, you go and you try that with Bagley. The problem with the process was then you overpaid for him. Then you traded a former first-round pick for James Wiseman, who then was taking Marvin Bagley's minutes. And then you had to trade assets to get rid of Marvin Bagley on the end of it. So, yes, I agree with here's what I've said is I hope that whatever has gone on, the only way I have confidence in this moving forward is that Troy Weaver, the front office, whoever's been making the decisions, has learned from mistakes, is willing to correct them, willing to grow and expand and whatever. And if this is an indictment of this, if this shows that like, hey, we made a mistake here, we need to get off of it, we need these expirings. I will say that Amari quickly, even as all of this was happening, Amari Sankofa, the second Pistons beat writer for the Free Press, he said, this is like the foundation. This is the first step of what should be more moves. And so I'm trying to hold on to the fact that this may have set up some other things and not trying to rush to too much. I also like those second round picks. I haven't fully been able to grasp what they are. There's weird, like the least and most favorable, but one of those may be the Pistons own, which in 2025, which could be a pretty high pick. So those aren't like nothing into the second round picks from what it looks like right now. Just wanted to put that out there. Although, like say, it's very convoluted with those picks a little bit.
Yeah. So I agree with you that this is like the precursor to moves for both of these teams, frankly. On the Pistons side, Danilo Gallinari and Mike Muscala have been two of the guys I've kind of been looking at as like potential buyout candidates, right? I've kind of been assuming that that's where this ends. The big thing with the Gallinari move is that Gallinari, unfortunately, signed this deal with the Boston Celtics and never got to play for the Boston Celtics, right? If he had been bought out by the Wizards, he wouldn't have been able to play for the Celtics. Like they couldn't have bought out Gallinari, the Wizards, and then Gallinari been able to sign for Boston under league rules. But now, because he's been traded somewhere, and then there's the potential for him to get bought out, he certainly has not been bought out as we're talking right now. If he is to be bought out, he can go sign with Boston now, which Boston needs depth. I'm not going to sit here and say that Gallo is like some playoff difference maker at this point. And I think they would need to sign or trade for somebody else depth wise. But I think that Gallo could, in theory, make some sense there as like a bigger guy who can shoot in some respect. Mike Muscala has been in Boston before, floor spacer, et cetera, et cetera. Like both of these guys like kind of make sense for Boston, and neither of them were capable of being moved back to Boston unless they were traded. So that piece of it was interesting to me. The second piece of it is if you buy players out, if you're the Detroit Pistons, you create roster spots and you create flexibility to potentially bring back 2 guys for 1 guy, 3 guys for 1 guy in a trade. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that the Pistons have many opportunities to trade 3 for or 1 for 3, 1 for 2, et cetera, et cetera. But it just creates more flexibility. It also creates flexibility to potentially convert some 2-way guys. Like Stanley Amude has had some moments this year. I don't really hate the potential for him to get converted, to be honest. Then you can bring in another 2-way guy. Like it brings up real potential avenues for improvement and to bring in different types of talent at the end of the day. So go ahead, Bryce.
No, I was just going to say, you go ahead and finish. I was just going to say, I want to make sure that also the trade exemption came up. They got like, it's a little less than 6, but that is part of this as well. So again, as the chat is saying, like, at the end of the day, it's still bad that you had to get rid of draft capital to get off of Marvin Bagley. I get it. I fully support and agree with that 1000%. I'm just honestly right now, I'm still just trying to provide the context around what all was created. And as you're saying, some potential options and things that could be used moving forward. Because as we know, most trades, even though we want instant reactions, instant win-loss, there's a lot of things that have to happen after that to decide whether it was or not, or, was it a good move? What is it the start of something else?
Worth noting for the Pistons as well, that $5.7 million trade exception that they create in this deal is actually like a potential value add to them because they do not currently have a trade exception available to them. Now they will lose that trade exception if they end up using cap space this summer, which again, it seems like that's where this is going. And given all of the context that we just outlined regarding what Troy Weaver's process here, you can't let Troy Weaver make this decision. You can't let Troy Weaver make the decision on who to pay because this free agency class is not strong. And we are setting up for a circumstance where the Pistons are getting more cap space to potentially overpay in free agency to do stuff. Now, you can use cap space in a lot of different ways. You can, if you want to in the summer, trade Jaden Ivey for a star and just take the guy into cap space and everything like that. Hypothetically, I'm not saying that's happening. I'm just saying that like you cannot let Troy Weaver make this decision, I think, based off of the Marvin Bagley deal to create cap space is kind of the epitome of why you can't let Troy Weaver make the decision to go pay somebody else like Marvin Bagley.
I think that's what we're going to get though. And this was secondhand, so I'm definitely not reporting this. I haven't read the article yet, but I believe James Edwards III may have written this, that it looks like maybe Weaver was going to get the deadline in the offseason. Now, again, this was secondhand. I haven't read it yet. So I absolutely do not want to put words down that James did not type or write. because James does an amazing job. But I mean, my thing is, if you were going to fire Troy Weaver, you should have done it before 4 weeks before the deadline. And so I think he's at least going to operate the deadline. And I don't know. I think I'm of the mindset that we're going to see Troy Weaver operate the deadline in the offseason at the very least.
That is something, if that's going to happen. That does not make sense to me. For the Wizards, I'm a little bit surprised that they decided to take on the Bagley deal, but like if one of those second rounders could be quite valuable, like Bryce is saying, in terms of the protections. I'll take a look here momentarily. I sort of understand it. Like, it's only 1 year after this one. It's 12.5 million. They are, I believe, over the cap moving forward. And again, as we just discussed, this is not really the off season where you want to go like crazy in free agency. So, taking on this money makes some sense. And look, like the Wizards kind of need another big man body, especially if they're going to move Dan Gafford, who is somebody that I think could end up getting real value on the market. Gafford, like I look at teams like the Rockets, I look at teams kind of across the league, the Mavericks need like another body potentially as a center, not necessarily as a starter, but just as a good 20 to 25 minute per game guy that can come in, give you rim protection as a shot blocker, rim run, finish at the basket, do all of the simple things that Gafford does really well. If you're going to move him, you need to have like a replacement body at the very least who can like play center. So this to me could be the precursor to something like that. If they decide they want to go down that route, they don't have to make a decision on Gafford. He has 2.5 more years left on his contract. But if they decide that, somebody's going to pay a first round pick for Daniel Gafford, be it a late first rounder or whatever, it's an interesting concept to me.
Yeah, to me, this is good process by the Wizards, right? You have two guys on expirings that are probably not a ton of value. Like we're talking about the Pistons just buying them out, right? So you get a guy, you get an extra year of the Marvin Bagley money, but is that really hindering what the Wizards are going to do this offseason? Bagley has shown some signs, at least offensively. I thought he had times where he played decently well, and I've referred to him as a fifth big, a quality fifth big, which I'm counting both the 5 and the 4 in that. So I don't even know that he's like on your 2-man depth chart, but he's then the fifth guy that when somebody's out or injured or foul trouble, you can bring him in. He has some nice soft touch, those type of things. Maybe a change of scenery for Isaiah Livers. He finds whatever we all thought he may have had. I know it's come out that multiple people talked about how him and Jordan Poole roomed together at Michigan. Maybe being with an old friend from college is going to help him find something. But at the end of the day, if neither of those guys work out at all, you got 2 second-round picks for 2 expiring 32-plus-year-olds that weren't really making a huge dent in anything anyway. So I think for the Wizards, we talk about good and bad process. This felt like good process for them in terms of what they did, even if it's not any sort of needle moving move for them in their rebuild.